Hi, everybody. This is Crosstown Conversations, and we are rocking and rolling here in this office trying to get ourselves together. And I've got some pretty interesting folks here today. We're going to talk about the new entrepreneurial movement in the city that we all know has been a part of our life ever since the storm. We're going to be talking with a young man who has written a really interesting book about it's really, to me, it's about resilience and figuring out how to make it in a different kind of world from what you've been raised in, and it's all about fishing. So all of you fisher people out there, you're going to enjoy this. And then we're going to talk with the director of Flood City, and believe it or not, it's not New Orleans, it's Johnston, Pennsylvania, and it's an big old storm that happened up there and flood that happened up there, and we're going to compare notes. I'm going to start the show today with just a little mini rant. You know, I don't usually do this. I often say to people, I am not Rachel Maddow, who I greatly admire, not so much for her strident style, but for her facts. She pins the facts down time after time. But I just want to say this about how they're trying to torture Hillary Clinton right now with this whole thing about her secrecy pendant. You know, she and I are sort of in a relatively similar generation. And when I came up in that generation, we actually liked privacy. It was a thing. Everybody respected privacy. I didn't even list my phone number for a couple decades after being on the news. I really didn't want to get calls from weird guys. I just wanted to live my private life, and I didn't want everybody knowing everything that happened in my life. So I don't think she has some kind of weird obsession with secrecy. I think she comes from a different period from the millennials who want to post on the Facebook what color panties they were wearing yesterday. You know, I just think it's a different era, a different view of how we interconnect. So let's cut her just a little bit of slack on this issue. On the other hand, we have a guy accusing her of being secret who won't release his income taxes, the first guy who's ever run for president who won't tell us how he makes his money, how much he makes, from who, and about his 200 plus whatever deals around the globe that he has that could very well be a real conflict with his job as opposed to the fake conflicts he's tried to conjure over the foundation that they have. And I understand there's a big story out today in Newsweek. I haven't seen it yet, so if anybody wants to call in and tell me what's in it, but apparently it has to do with the some of the practices of the so-called foundation that Donald Trump runs. Okay, so I'm sorry. Just have to have that little rant out there because privacy is not such a terrible thing. Yes, they're in the public sector. Yes, they have to share a lot of information, but I think to characterize it as some kind of obsession with secrecy is a bunch of malarkey. Okay, now on to our show. So the first people we have on are very much involved with the entrepreneurial movement in the city. And they work with Propeller, which is one of the really important and effective, impactful organizations in the city that's working to help us be more entrepreneurial. And I often tell people when they're coming to the city, listen, if you're coming here and you think you're going to look for a job, forget about it. If you're coming here and you are going to figure out how to create and innovate and build a business, hallelujah, this is a place for you. But we're not a big job-heavy city. What we are a city of you can do it here, and you don't have hundreds of people crowding around you trying to do the same thing, because we're a smaller city, and we are really just getting started in this entrepreneurial universe. So with me is Traci, Amanda Washington, and Kevin Williams, and I'm going to let them introduce their titles, and then we're going to get into this discussion because, on the one hand, I'm a big believer in entrepreneurialism. On the other hand, I'm not such a great one myself, and I have some theories about the new folks who've come to town and what they are really doing, and I'm very addicted to the notion that most of the folks who've come here have come here because they're creatives, and they want to be in a creative city. And I think, as you all know who listen to my show, that is an under-recognized aspect of our creative economy, of our economy in general. With that, Traci Amanda Washington.
Good afternoon. Yes, I'm Traci Amanda Washington. I'm the Education Program Manager over at Propeller. And like you've said, we work to help launch and support social ventures that address challenges in different areas or sectors, so food management, water management, health, and educational equity. And I manage our education portfolio.
All right. And Kevin?
Hey, I'm Kevin Wilkins. Traci, it's good to see you. And thanks for having us here today. Our company is Trepwise, and we are an entrepreneurial firm, impact consulting, helping to grow and sustain organizations across a variety of industries, both for-profit and nonprofit, using entrepreneurial thinking and innovative approaches. So Traci works and Propeller works with a lot of early-stage organizations that have a social mission, who really want to use entrepreneurship as an agent of change in the city to help address some key issues. Once they finish working with Propeller, or organizations like Idea Village, or organizations like Goldman Sachs,
Or
a lot of different
schools.
4.0 schools, where help organizations kind of get off the ground. We help organizations then continue to walk and grow, whether you're for-profit or nonprofit.
I think obviously both those stages are really critical to what's going on in the city. And Kevin, you signaled to me just before we started that you feel that you have kind of a finger on the pulse of this whole movement, let's call it, in the city. And it is definitely much more prominent in our economic development and in our thinking about ourselves than it was before the storm.
Sure.
It's one of those, upsides. We had a bunch of downsides, and we still have some people who are on the downside, but we certainly have had some upsides, and this is one of them.
Yes.
So you paint me your picture, and then I'm going to see whether you and I are on the same landscape.
So my story starts, Jane, with I married a woman who's from New Orleans, but I'm from New England.
How many times have I heard that?
Right? She was born and brought up here.
Marriage is a key factor in people moving to New Orleans, other than the creativity of the city.
Correct. So she was born and brought up here. We spent most of our married life in Boston. 6 years ago, we decided to move back because we wanted to be part of a resurging city. She lived away for over.
Not to mention, it's a little cold up there.
I'm used to it, though, and she never got used to it. So, yes, it's a little bit cold up there.
And so you may never get used to the humidity. Your blood changes.
It thins.
They say
so
it kind
I'm
of
told.
thins out.
So I'm told.
Keep waiting.
But the excuse for, 20-some-odd years was there was nothing for us to do here. My wife was part of that generation, which was the brain drain of the city, where people chose, if they wanted to build careers across a variety of industries, they chose to leave New Orleans and go to cities like New York, Boston, San Francisco. And that was our story. 6 years ago, though, we saw a different city. The post-Katrina world, the observation is that, you had two choices with Katrina. You chose to leave or you chose to stay. And if you chose to stay, you had to do things differently. So this whole entrepreneurship at a really broad level, culturally, kind of got baked into the oxygen of New Orleans. Everything, in a way, had to be done differently. And it gave permission, actually, to look at everything with a new kind of critical eye. With that came a lot of economic development dollars. With that came the birth of organizations like Propeller. Idea Village, who had been around pre-storm, really picked up momentum the post-storm because you had a lot of people coming here with new ideas and wanting to make a difference, wanting to make an impact, yet needed support and needed some services to help them get off the ground. So when I moved here 6 years ago, I plugged into Idea Village, and I began as their entrepreneur in residence. And what I began to see, when you visit New Orleans for decades, you walk around the park and you go to nice restaurants. You don't really plug into the economic aspects of the city. When you move here, I began to see a different type of New Orleans. Young, early-stage companies in industries that were still early for the city, but really trying to kind of grow out these companies and grow out the industrial space. 6 years later, I'm seeing a lot more depth across some of these industries. Still early. No one's pretending we're not Boston, we're not San Francisco. But we have some real traction across spaces like water and healthcare and education and hospitality and the arts, actually. Organizations being born both in the for-profit and the nonprofit space to help build the cultural assets of this city. 6 years ago, people would never have been able to pay for our services. If I came and tried to open a shop saying, come and pay me for help in terms of growing your organization, there wouldn't be a lot of people. Right now, both across nonprofits and for-profits, there is a lot of need as these organizations continue to grow, and it's new for the city.
There's a need for those that are growing and continuing to grow, but there are also a lot of nonprofits that are falling off the planet as the money that came in initially
That's
for
correct.
the post-storm recovery is drying up.
That's correct.
And I got organizations all around me that are either gone or are struggling to survive, and quite frankly, mine is one of them. We not a lot of people get the idea of advocacy on the part of the creative economy. They get putting their name up on the wall in a museum. That's easy, but they don't necessarily get fostering the kind of thing you're talking about. And you have a couple of really, Andrea and Chen at Propeller and Tim Williamson are really good examples of people who figured that out. And Andrea is just really effective. Tim had a lot of network to build off because he's an old-time New Orleanian family and so forth. But let me turn to you for a bit, Traci, Amanda, because I want to understand what about the people who haven't quite put that organization together yet and are still kind of struggling, and they're listening. I can tell you there are people listening to my show all the time who are saying, for who?
I think for who is an incredible question, and one that at Propeller we're seeking to work to find the answer of who the resources are available for and how we can provide resources to those small ventures or those ventures who are socially minded and really want to sustain themselves in a city like New Orleans. You mentioned the kind of after Katrina boom, and what we're really saying is that there was an opportunity for both locals and people who may have not been from the city to come in and impact change in our city and really help to grow it in a number of areas. But they have to find the resources in order to make that happen. One of the things that we do at Propeller are accelerator programs.
By the way, let me just tell everybody where Propeller is, because I like to kind of tell people how to get there, where to park.
Certainly.
So Propeller is at the intersection of Washington
and Broad.
That's
correct.
Couldn't be more central.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And you got parking.
Yes.
And you're open all day.
The space is open to our coworkers.
You're even open into the night a lot.
A number of times. We have a number of events that happen in the evening
So if
hours.
somebody is interested in what you're trying to do and they're looking for how they can get off the ground, maybe they can just drop in?
Absolutely they can. We have resources right now that are tailored towards those 4 particular sectors. But our building is filled with coworkers who themselves are small entrepreneurs, people who support the entrepreneurs that are within our building, as well as our Propeller staff. And if someone walks in and says, I have a business, what can you offer to help? We certainly wouldn't turn them away, and we would love to be able to provide whatever information we can to them. Our work mainly, though, is focused in those 4 sectors.
So one of the things that has been troubling me also is that there is such an explosion of nonprofits in the city. Does anybody know who they are and where they are? Is there any kind of a directory? Tell me, because I'd like to know. What's the address for the directory that tells
of nonprofits?
Me who the nonprofits are and what they're doing? Because, quite frankly, I turn around and every day I hear about a new organization that's dealing in my territory in the arts. I'm saying, wow, what are they doing? Okay? And
There are a lot of
go.
nonprofits in the city. I think the Greater New Orleans Foundation does a nice job of trying to inventory the number of nonprofits that are there. But I think your point is right. There was a ton of money after Katrina that came in and really fostered these nonprofits who want to do a lot of good. And that money was drying up. So the question then becomes, how can these nonprofits sustain themselves? And do they have to be all grant dependent, which is dangerous, right?
It's worse than dangerous. It's impossible.
Right.
Because basically you get grants. We were talking about grants before. You get a grant for a project.
Right.
But how do you sustain the operations of an organization if you don't have operating income? And that you need from corporate donors, and we're kind of shy of those.
So we work with a lot of nonprofits to address that exact issue. How do we diversify your revenue streams? What type of programming can you create? What kind of earned revenue stream can you have? Because to survive in this city where lots of people are chasing similar dollars, there is a need for these organizations to stand on their own and create fee-for-service type models in combination perhaps with other fundable concepts.
And frankly, the creatives who you're talking about are innovators, right? And so they have great ideas, but they may not have the structure or kind of the backbone of that idea to understand how to not just get it off the ground, but to keep it running. And so some of the programs that we provide at Propeller, like our Startup Accelerator or our Growth Accelerator, the support support that Kevin offers after companies kind of graduate from that stage onto the next stage, really support them in creating those business plans that will help them not just walk but run and be a real established organization.
So give me some sense of numbers. Do you have any stats on, the universe that we're talking about? Any sense of, how many new startups, how many growing small organizations there are in the city that is your kind of, let's say, market and constituency?
So I don't have a total number of early stage ventures in New Orleans. That would be a great number to have. I don't
think anybody has it, quite frankly.
I know a lot. Hundreds go through programming in the city. Whether you're Goldman Sachs, 10,000 small businesses, whether you're 4.0, whether you're Propeller or Idea Village. In any given year, you will have hundreds of new organizations and established organizations looking for additional support go through the doors of those organizations. And then there's a lot of companies that have been around for a while, perhaps family-run business that are transferring from generation to generation, who also need a fresh perspective of what they need to do to continue to grow and sustain themselves.
In the good old days, or as the kids say, back in the day, that always makes me really squirm because it kind of makes it sound like it's really back there. But there was a Chamber of Commerce. And most people who were in the business world would be a member. And so you could actually get a list of the companies in the city and what they did. Or if you're in an industry, for example, in New Orleans, if you're in the tourism industry, it's very easy to find the companies because they want to be a member, so they're in their membership directories, and you can find. I don't have that sense of being able to nail, okay, who's out there doing X, Y, and Z?
So the good news here in New Orleans is the Chamber's thriving again and really growing. And they do a lot of good in the economy for all stages of companies. You've got the Black Chamber, you've got the Hispanic Chamber, so you've got not only the New Orleans Chamber, but you've got ancillary chambers as well who are catering to specific segments of the community. You've got the Mississippi Chamber, who does a lot of work with the New Orleans Chamber.
Let me put you on the spot, Kevin and Traci both. So, okay, let's again, before we went on the air, I talked about how I feel that we are maybe overplaying slightly the entrepreneurial climate of the city, and I just hope you're right that we're just going gangbusters. Let's assume that's correct. But I feel that the creatives are being completely underappreciated and underconsidered, and they're not getting as much business support. Maybe we know that the business is not their primary way of functioning. They want to create, be innovative, and I have an artist husband, so I know exactly how this works. The last thing they really want to do is get out there and market their stuff. But I just think in terms of understanding the importance of the creative economy to the future of the city of New Orleans, that ain't there yet. That the business community is just not recognizing the substantive, serious value of the creative market. And this is what I say. The leading opportunity for the city, and I want you all to go to the Americans for the Arts and see the new legislative initiative of them to try to get federal legislation to support the creative economy. We're not just talking about painting and dancing. We're talking about all of the media, all of the design initiatives, the literary, the culinary, that's all creative industries, right? Mm-hmm. And we're not getting that recognition from, I don't care whether you're talking about G&O Inc., I don't care if you want to talk about NOLABA, I don't care if you want to talk about the chambers, they just don't seem to get it yet. So I feel like I'm failing, quite frankly, in my messaging. But maybe I need some help. So I need your advice, Kevin. Tell me how to get better commitment, understanding from the business community for the creative sector. They don't even have creative economy listed as one of the priorities of the New Orleans Business Alliance. I was shocked when they chose their priorities, and they did not choose that. And here we are, allegedly one of the creative centers of the whole damn globe, and we are just not getting the support from people who are trying to grow the economy here in New Orleans. Okay, you just had my second rant of the day.
That's okay, and I love the fact you've got strong opinions. Yeah. I tend not to be categorical, okay? So I think there's actually a lot of support for the arts. One of our clients was the Arts Council.
For the museums and the Arts Council, but that is not the creative economy.
So the Arts Council is a hub in the city that really helps to foster the cultural economy of the city. They believe that arts can transform communities, and they work with a lot of artists and a lot of different organizations across the city to really help promote. as they continue to grow, Nick Stillman's the new CEO, and I think he's been doing remarkable work. It's part of the 2017 priorities for the city for the tricentennial. And separate from the Arts Council, and I'm not here to speak or showcase only one organization, we work with a lot of different arts organizations in the city who are very entrepreneurial in their approach. Whether you're a Pelican Bomb who wants to promote different types of artists and different types of programming through arts, whether you're the opera that's reinventing the role opera can play in the city, whether you're Yaya for youth leadership and youth programming. There's a lot of different arts.
He's more interested in the arts than I thought he was.
There's a lot of different arts because we work with them. How can they sustain themselves? How can they continue to grow? There's a lot of cultural assets here that New Orleans not only should leverage, but needs to leverage.
I'm just going to give you, I want you to go look at that Americans for the Arts initiative at the federal level, and you'll see a little bit more. And also, I'm going to send you a list of the kinds of funding commitments that have been made in cities around the country, places like Denver and Jackson and places in Ohio and Kentucky, that are like multiple millions more of commitment to the arts sector than we have in our city.
So I am so aware of that data, having worked on the strategic plan for the Arts Council, and the Arts Council is aware of that data, and the city is aware of that data. So you have to start somewhere, right? You have to put goals on the table in terms of what you want to achieve for the next 3 years. What does 2017 look like for the city? Look at the hospitality industry. So New Orleans was just named the #1 food city in the country. Okay, that's all exciting. But let's dig behind that. Hospitality in the city is a huge generator and a huge growth engine. The number of new restaurants and the entrepreneurs driving these new restaurants.
And they market the city based on the culture. And I want you to check on how much money from the marketing dollars that are spent on the city are spent supporting the cultural organizations. So I have to, I'm sorry, I know I've sort of challenged you.
You cannot leave us like
I was
this.
going to say.
No, I'm sorry. You have made a very good case for, and you were very specific, and I really appreciate your recognition of efforts that are being made. And so I'm not saying that there isn't effort being made, and you called a couple of the really good examples. Pelican Bomb is a very good example of an organization that's doing good stuff, and the Arts Council too, and so forth. But we're going to talk more about this offline.
And I look forward to that.
All right. I'm just out of time because I have a creative in my office, and I want to make sure I give him his time.
Thanks so
and
much.
Then I have two creatives. I have first an author of a book, and then I have a theater group. So you won't mind if I give them some time too, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you guys so much for coming out. We're going to continue this conversation and compare notes, and I'll have you back on and give you more time. How's
Wonderful.
that?
I appreciate that.
Thank you both for coming. Traci Washington, Amanda Washington, I know why you do that because there's another very powerful Traci Washington in town, and Kevin Wilkins. And I love the idea of Trepwise, and I'm going to check in and see. I still haven't gotten an answer on that, but we'll let you know.
Come visit all the creative innovators that we have in Propeller Space.
Well, you invite me.
Awesome.
And
I
I'm
sure
coming.
will. Absolutely.
All right. Now, speaking of a creative innovator, Brendan Jones is going to step up to the mic, and he is an author who lives in Alaska. Okay, Alaska is nowhere near Louisiana. I know that. But you're going to be amazed when he reads a portion of his book of the connection between the world that he has written about in his book and the world that we live in. So the book is called The Alaskan Laundry, and I can't wait to find out why it's called The Alaskan Laundry, because as I read it, it's kind of about fisher people, and it's about a woman who doesn't start out as a fisher person, but I don't know what to call fisher people other than, fishermen is what we usually say, but of course that means just men, and there are women out there. So, Brendan, what's the way to refer to fisher people?
That's a really good question. Women who are in the fishing industry up in Alaska, they just call themselves fishermen. And
okay.
Actually, just to your point, when I was writing this book as research, I spoke with a bunch of women who fished early, like in the 60s and the 70s, and I asked them that same question. And one of the things they said, which I thought was so interesting, was people never really treated us differently than men. That's what we found. The only thing important in Alaska and in the fishing industry was how many fish we were bringing in, and that's kind of how you were judged. So they just never.
That's a good count. I mean, that's treating people equally. Right?
Yeah. So the idea of being a fisherwoman, it just didn't matter that much.
Okay. So First of all, Brendan is here in New Orleans because he has a good friend who works here. And actually, his friend works on coastal issues. He's one of the people who's responsible for what's going to happen as a result of some of the fines that BP had to pay the feds and making sure that that money gets spent well on the recovery of our region after that spill, which we tend to forget about. But the results of it are still out there, and we still have oil on the coastline of our region and so forth. But Brendan, tell me why you wrote about Alaska and why you wrote about a woman who becomes a fisherwoman.
Well, first off, just thank you so much for having me here on the show. Just appreciate it, and just listening to that conversation, being such a proponent for the arts. It's just great to come to a great city like this and see. As far as how I ended up writing about Alaska and having a female protagonist, I went to Alaska when I was 19, and I commercial fished to make money for college, and I just fell in love with the island where I was, Baranof Island. I lived in the woods for 9 months.
That's way up there, isn't it?
Well, as far as Alaska goes, not so much. It's in southeast Alaska.
Okay.
So there's a section of Alaska that's actually a temperate rainforest.
A what?
It's a temperate rainforest.
A rainforest in Alaska.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Okay.
So it's the largest.
Now I just learned something.
It's the largest intact temperate rainforest in the world. It's called the Tongass. So it's 17 million acres.
17 million. Now tell me something. I'm just curious. Is there any kind of conservation going on there?
Yeah, I mean it's a whole different topic. But
how do you spell that, Tonga?
Tongass.
Okay.
Sitka Conservation Society. I'm on the board there, and we work to stop the loggers and all that stuff. But yeah, it's an ongoing fight. But
okay, so back to our fisherwoman.
Right, so I started this book about 10 years ago. If you told me that I was going to write a female protagonist, I would have laughed at you. You know, I considered myself coming out of the Hemingway tradition, and I had my very strong boxer male protagonist, but I also had about 9 other characters, and I wrote about 30,000 words for each of them. And when I started kind of banging them up against each other, this one minor character, Tara, from South Philadelphia, it was like a battle or a boxing match or something, and she just emerged. And when I got the agent, it was Tara and a love story between her and a Cuban named Santiago. And then when Houghton, the publisher, bought the book, the editor there asked me to make it just about Tara, and all of a sudden I was writing a female protagonist, this kind of coming-of-age story of this woman in South Philadelphia, this boxer coming to Alaska and going into the male-dominated
Wait. I'm missing a beat here. A boxer?
Mm-hmm.
Wait, she was a boxer?
She is a boxer, yeah.
She is a boxer?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I missed that beat because I haven't read the whole book. I read just a little pieces of it that really intrigued me, but I didn't get that. Okay, go ahead.
So, yeah, as I said, she was the last one standing in that kind of war of attrition, and she was my hero, and she still is. And I was told in workshops, I did the Stegner Fellowship, that by one person in particular, that I didn't necessarily have rights to write a female perspective.
How many men have written female perspectives and vice versa?
Right, so that's
so
that's
I
the
don't
argument.
necessarily buy that.
Yeah. So, anyways, that's how it ended up, and yeah, I'm really happy with her.
Okay, so is this a book about resilience? Is this a book about adventure and bravery? Is this a book about on-the-job training? Is this a book about how we create a new life?
It's if I had to pigeonhole it, I would call it a hero's journey. I mean, it's Odysseus, or it's Star Wars, or it's a young person leaving the ordinary world, finding a mentor figure. They're 17. I think it was Joseph Campbell outlined these 17 very specific steps in the adventurers and this hero's journey, and coming up against all sorts of tasks that they have to, rites of passage that they have to go through. And Tara goes through this in Alaska, where they say of the guys, the odds are good, but the goods are odd, right? I mean, there are just so many guys up there, and she has to prove herself, and she does in the end.
I pulled a passage from the book that struck me as maybe just a moment of that experience that she was having there that I think people here could relate to. And I think we have enough time for you to kind of touch into it. So why don't we go ahead and have a little reading?
Sure. And hopefully this won't give too much away at the end, but I'll just dive in right here. As she swam, the tip of her boot brushed a boat rib. She stood, balancing, water almost to her chest. Rafts of yellow floor planks floated around her. She gritted her teeth against the cold, and then she saw it, a flash of white in the headlamp's beam, water gushing in and around the sides of the loose through-hole. So I should just back up for a second and say that a boat that she's become very involved with is sinking beneath her, and she's trying to locate the source of the water coming in. Right then she understood what had happened. The end of the 100-foot hose they'd used to pump out the bilge had been left in the ocean. After the bilge level dropped, she had unplugged the pump. Overnight, the hose had back-siphoned, gulping ocean, flooding her boat as she slept. And now there was water coming in and around the seal of the through-hole, which had been put beneath the waterline by the growing weight of the boat. From back in the cargo hold, she heard a noise. She curled her fingers around the lead pipe, swinging herself forward, pedaling her feet in the water. And just before ducking beneath the bulkhead, she stopped. The pump, she thought. Get the pump out of the bilge, stop the water from back-siphoning. That was the start. Even better, find the plug end and start the pump up. Start emptying the boat. How quickly she had worked in the simulated engine room, clamping on a shred of rubber, tapping in a wedge with a hammer. She needed that same speed now. Seawater lapped against her chin. She tasted again the dull, rotten flavor of used engine oil. Her fingers ran over the iron lever on the strainers for the oil manifold. There, the cord of the 110-volt pump. She pulled, and up it came, its plastic case, dripping oil. She gripped the metal handle and slipped beneath the bulkhead. Tara, you down there?
So we'll leave it there. I just want to say The Alaskan Laundry by Brendan Jones. This is a book that I'm going to be excited to read myself because there is nothing scarier than being in a boat on the water and you running into trouble. I have had that experience several times. I was used to spend my summers in Gloucester, Massachusetts, and my husband and I were on a little catamaran, and all of a sudden a squall comes up, and we're being pulled out to sea. I mean, it was, I can't tell you how frightening that was. And then my husband fancies himself a boatsman, but I'm not so sure about his, full talent in this area. I know he's listening to my show, so I'm going to be careful about what I say here. But there were other moments of fear. So I would have read that so differently. I would have said, I can't find the bulge. I can't figure out what's happening on this ship. Where am I going down? I mean, I would have been panicked.
Yeah.
But she didn't panic, right? She had to grapple with the reality and just figure out what to do.
She kept her head around her. Yeah, she did.
So where did you finishing up this book leave you in your thinking about life and your interest in what you're going to do next after you finish this?
Writing for me has always been about finding answers to questions that I don't understand. And so the end of the book is very much about home. I mean, that's what it is. If I had to boil it down, I would just call it a meditation on home.
And don't we all? And that's one of the reasons why I thought, even though it's kind of far-fetched to talk about Alaska, I've sensed that, and that's what New Orleans is so much about. Is this is home for so many of us, even for those of us who've come from elsewhere. It just, I call it everybody's second home.
Mm-hmm. And there's this great quote that literature is the supreme means for renewing your emotional and sensuous life and learning a new awareness. And for me, the awareness that I learned over the course of writing this book was just what was home for me. And so I actually live on a tugboat with my wife and daughter up in Alaska, and that's home.
So my husband came home from the East Coast last night on a plane with a bunch of guys who what's the right word for steering a tugboat? You don't drive it, you what? Navigate it, you...
Navigate works, yeah.
Navigate tugboats up the Mississippi River up into, I don't know, further than the Mississippi. And so they're all coming back, and they're all plastered totally, and he's sitting there drinking his vodka and milk, and they're making fun of him. But the outcome of it was that Porkchop, one of the guys who's a captain of a tugboat who's about to get married, is going on a honeymoon on a boat, and he wants to meet with us before then. I'm really looking forward to, because you know what? I have a very peculiar obsession with tugboats.
Oh, yeah?
And it comes from living in New York, where you've got water all around you, and you watch tugboats all day, and you just want to be on one. And then I come down here, and we're constantly surrounded with tugboats.
Yeah.
And again, I just want to be on one.
Oh, yeah.
So I envy you being able to actually live on it, although I'm not sure about being there day and night. That's very interesting. You are going to be doing readings from this book tonight at the
Octavia Books, and then tomorrow night at Antenna Gallery.
Okay, let's do Octavia Books' address. And do you have the address handy?
You know, I don't have the address handy.
Octavia Books, y'all, Google it and you'll find out. It's uptown.
Mm-hmm.
And Antenna Gallery is downtown on St. Claude Avenue, so we all know that in the art world where that is. So I know that your readings are going to be interesting. And I really appreciate you coming to New Orleans and talking about this. And y'all go check out the readings and check out the book, The Alaskan Laundry, Brendan Jones. What's the next book?
Still in the works. It's called Swimming Angeline, but it's still being worked out.
Swimming Angeline. So we're still in the water.
We're still in the water. Can't get away from the water.
Absolutely. Speaking of water, our next guest, and you might just listen in for a minute, Mark Routhier is an actor and a director, and he has put together a production of something called Flood City, which is about the great flood that hit Johnstown, Pennsylvania, where you lived for quite a few years, Brendan. And again, we're sort of talking about a place very distant from New Orleans, but an experience that, without doubt, is going to resonate for anybody who comes to see this play. Again, tell me, what is the central thesis or theme or concept, or what are we going to get from watching your play?
Well, the idea, Gabrielle Reisman, who was here during the flood, she did some research and discovered the Johnstown flood that happened in 1889, where basically 20 million tons of water burst through the city after the South Fork Dam.
Say that again, how many?
20 million tons of water that had been in a Lake Conemaugh, I think they called it, which was sort of the playground of the rich, the Carnegies and the Mellons.
Familiar to you?
I know Johnson the Flood, but these details are fascinating.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. So there was a dam up there, and they had been told that it was maybe a little weak, and they could have fixed it, but they didn't. And it rained really hard for 2 days, and the dam burst, and all this water went rushing through the valley and just blew Johnstown apart. There were 2,200 people that died. There were 99 families that everyone went away. All of the all of the structures and the buildings were destroyed. Some of the buildings, obviously, on the ridges of the valley were left intact, but essentially, this burgeoning mill town was absolutely destroyed.
How did people come back?
That's a very interesting question.
Is that part of the play, or is the play mainly about the incident itself, the flood
play
itself?
is mostly about, it is about coming back too, but it's about the aftermath just after the flood. So it's the week and 2 weeks and 3 weeks right after the flood. And basically there are a few characters from the town who survived, and there are a few characters who come
just a few.
We only follow a few, so there's one guy who was working in the mills who magically was able to survive even though
What kind of
he
mills
was
are we
speared
talking
with a
about?
pipe. A steel mill.
Steel, okay.
Right. So even though he was speared with a pipe that's lodged in his head, he is still alive. The thing that's magical about this play is that, and the thing that I think Gabby did a lovely job with this, is that it's a really lighter side look at it, even though we're dealing with a terrible, terrible natural disaster.
So we're talking dark comedy?
We are talking almost absurdist comedy. And the comedy comes from the situations that arise from watching the survivors handle every day, including some people coming from outside, like a city planner comes in from the outside world. And
we know about that here in New Orleans.
Exactly. You know, and he says a few gems that we all remember about, well, they seem maybe they're better off than they were before because we can rebuild the city the way we'd like to. And there are beautiful residences, very sly, that Gabby has filled in this sort of two-act journey through the survival of the people after this great disaster.
So now, Gabby, just take a moment and catch me up with who Gabby is and where she's from.
She is originally from Illinois. She moved down here before Katrina.
So she lives in New Orleans?
She does live in New Orleans now.
So she's lived through Katrina, too.
She did.
Mm-hmm.
She did.
So this she picks up on the Johnson thing, riffing off her experience here in New Orleans during Katrina.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, as I was directing the play and thinking about it more and more and more, I was thinking about the Oscar Wilde play. Why can't I remember the name of it? It's the most famous one.
Importance of Being Earnest.
Thank you. The Importance of Being Earnest. And there's so many references. He wrote that play 120 years ago, and there's so many references that resonate very strongly today. And I think Gabby has this very sly ability to create a world that's happening in 1889, but resonates very, very strongly because we see the city planner come through. We see the Red Cross lady who's a little bit officious and, you know, doesn't really have time for the locals but wants to save them all, but doesn't really want to know their human stories. And you know, there's a photographer that comes through who's working for the New York Times, and it's big business to be able to take pictures of this thing.
She definitely was channeling a lot of the experience we've had here in New Orleans. Because I'm listening to that, and I lived through it all, and I worked on the planning and the outreach, and was right in the heart of it. And you're talking stuff that we dealt with here. Go ahead.
Right. And that's what Gabby did such a beautiful job of writing this play, because the locals who have to cross paths with these people have to deal with them. And in the end, it's really a positive experience because there's this one woman who's, you know, she's lost everybody, but she can't come to terms with the fact that she has lost everybody, and she becomes a moment-to-moment entrepreneur. So she gets the photographer and gets him to take pictures of her for 20 cents a photo, you know, and then she sees the guy with a pipe in his head and realizes that he might need a little help. So they start to work toward this idea that of a circus act, and that he's been saved and that he's somehow magical. And there's a revival scene at the end of the first act where there's supposed to be speaking their truths, and the truths that get spoken are really, really funny and in kind of an absurdist slant. So she has done a really sly piece of writing that I think doesn't poke fun at people, but really looks at the lighter side of it by seeing people's resilience and sense of humor and ability to deal with absolute crassness in the face of people coming in from out of town who don't get it, and people that are trying to make a buck from it, and people that sort of are not dealing with the emotional heft of what's going on because they need to rebuild.
So, you know, I evacuated to Jackson, Mississippi, and then landed in Baton Rouge for quite a while. And if anybody had ever told me I would live in Baton Rouge for more than 2 days, I would have called them a liar. But right. I wound up being up there, and then came back fairly early to do some work on the committee that was bringing people back, and the Urban Land Institute came in. They're a national organization of real estate developers, and they came in and they wrote this book about they come in for a week and they do a kind of quick and dirty. Okay, here's what you should do, and they wrote this book that said, well, first of all, you should develop the areas that are in better shape, which is actually a fairly basic rule of recovery, is that you start where you've got stuff so you can get your commerce back up, and then it talked about the importance of green neighborhoods, and so. The timing was really pretty horrible because they make this presentation just as people are coming back and finding out that they've been wiped out, that their houses have been washed blocks away, that they have nothing left, that they have no neighbors, they have family dead, and so forth. So that became the big green dots moment in the New Orleans history when people, in not understanding the concept of, building green into your life so that it absorbs water and it's a good thing and water management and all those nice things, but it just came when people were not ready for it. And it was tragic, really, because the timing was just terribly off and people didn't understand the value of integrating green ways of living into your life so that you can fight the impacts of water. So, again, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Right, and you actually just taught me something about the play that I directed, because the play ends with this unlikely couple who have been wending their way through the story, end up together, and they're standing on the banks of the Conemaugh, and they're looking at this new property that they're going to build in the wake of all this destruction, and they're talking to the photographer who's going off to the next disaster, and the fiancée, the girlfriend says, which direction were they going to lay the street? And they're talking about how it's going to be set up, and she said, we should start a green grocery. And he says, I always wanted to have a green grocery. And I did not know that that's what it was referencing, but that must be what it's referencing.
It could be. I mean, there was also, the whole sort of movement towards, all the fancy new ways of thinking about food happen around the same time that we're going through this transition in the city about how we're going to live here. What's really hard to get your arms around now that I really worry about is this kind of disaster after disaster after disaster. And so now we have this huge flood that affected the lives of, I still don't have a real number, but it's like we know it's more than 50,000 people. That much we do know. And if I'm not mistaken, about 50,000 homes that were taken out in or heavily destroyed upstate. So the notion of living with the environment, and I actually have a series of things that I'm doing in St. Bernard Parish called Living with Climate Change, which is sort of maybe not. And what does that mean, and what is the responsibility of each one of us to, not only for our own lives and our family, but for our communities? It's kind of frightening, the extent to which Katrina was a huge one. Then came Sandy. There's this earthquake here, and there's that storm there, and a recognition that we're into a very different phase of life on this planet. And so I'm having I have to say every day I kind of have a moment of despair about the future of our planet. And I don't understand. Some people they say you have an optimism gene. Well, I don't really have an optimism gene. I have an existential gene, so I just kind of keep pushing ahead and trying to do things. But it's and here you are talking about a flood 100 years ago, but those kind of events are now more common.
Escalating.
Right?
Absolutely. And
so how does this affect? And I'm curious. Brendan is still sitting here with us. And, you don't have to stay, Brendan. You can leave anytime you want. But what about Alaska? I mean, the only thing I really know about there is things that have to do with the pipeline and the Native Americans who have maybe or maybe not won a temporary battle, maybe not the war against the pipeline going through their sacred lands. You hear about things like that, but I don't really hear about these kind of weather events. But Alaska, on the other hand, that's where all the icebergs are melting, right? So what's the experience up there with this?
Well, two things. I mean, first, I think you're talking about North Dakota with that pipeline going through the native lands.
Yeah, but where does that pipeline start?
I don't know. I don't know the answer.
Canada?
It's probably Canada.
Yeah.
Alaska, actually, the native corporation.
Northwest. It's all part of the Northwest for me.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's the native corporations. They call it the new harpoon. Instead of whaling, they drill for oil. So it's the native corporations that are kind of at the leading edge of oil exploration up there.
Oh, that's interesting.
But what's going on as far as climate change goes is really interesting. It's kind of like a slow Johnstown instead of this flash flood and just, inundating a valley. The water level is creeping up. It's a couple feet every year. And villages.
A couple of feet is not creeping. That's a lot, right?
Yeah. Well,
Is it really a couple of feet every year up there?
I don't know that, but it's coming up to the point where native villages right on the coast are having to be relocated, and they get federal money to do that. But they have to lift entire towns off the coast.
And that's what we're facing here. I mean, we've lost thousands of acres of marshland on the coast of Louisiana. Louisiana is one of the lowest areas on the entire Gulf Coast, in St. Bernard Parish and all the parishes along the coast of Louisiana. My husband just did a series of art showing the different elevations, and we're all blue, which is water, and green, which is low ground.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's an even bigger one is ocean acidification and ocean water temperature, algae blooms. The temperature of the ocean grows, and so algae just floods, and all of a sudden fish are in tough shape, and it's rough. I mean, the flip side of it is that it's actually built into the Alaska Constitution to create a sustainable fishery. So we're having record runs of salmon as far as commercial fishing goes. So the commercial fishing industry is doing actually really well up there, at least in Southeast.
What's in the Constitution? Explain that to me again.
Alaska was made a state in 1959, and it's written into the state constitution to create a sustainable fishery.
And what does that mean, a sustainable fishery? Is that that's not a farm of some kind, is it?
Exactly the opposite. Yeah, it's illegal.
It's natural.
Farm fish. Yeah, up in Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's to enable fishermen each year to go back and depend on stocks of fish that will be able to they can maintain a livelihood by catching.
So the government of the state is involved in maintaining that?
Yeah, it's Alaska Department of Fish and Game runs a lot of the fisheries. They don't trust the feds to run the fisheries because the feds mess it up. Mm-hmm. My friend Justin is deeply involved with NOAA, so he probably wouldn't necessarily agree with me, but fortunately he's not here to defend his position.
This is such a fascinating show. There's so many overlaps. I have a friend who is a halibut fisherman up in Homer.
Oh, yeah. Oh, cool, yeah.
Yeah, he's been up there for at least 20 years as well. He started as a fisherman, and now he's a broker, but he's been living up there in Homer for a very, very long time, and he is absolutely committed.
Up in Homer,
Alaska.
Alaska.
Yeah.
Homer, Houma, Alaska.
Homer, Homer.
Oh, Homer. Okay. Because we have a Homer, of course, in Louisiana, down on which is below us, somewhat below us. And I spent a lot of time in New England, as I mentioned before, and in cod fishing country, where the cod, of course, they're reducing their numbers greatly, and so a lot of people who used to be cod fishermen are no longer. And an artist friend of mine, Clara Wainwright, does quilting with the women who were the wives of the fishermen who now are not. They're still wives, but they're not wives of fishermen because there aren't as many fish to fish. So I'm trying to figure out how to do we really think? I mean, there was a big headline on the front page of the New York Times recently about Obama and feeling his legacy is really in addressing climate change issues and trying to build some potential ways and strategies that we can fight it off. And then you have scientists who say it's too late. I mean, I just have a real hard time understanding how this is going to go. I mean, the one thing about history we know is that it's never a continuous line in the same direction. It takes jags. Things change. So hopefully we are going to get our arms around this. Either that or some son of a tyrant in North Korea is going to bomb us all off the planet. I don't know, but help me, guys here. Give me hope.
Well, I don't know if I can give you hope. I was laughing because this gentleman who is running for president, if he wins, it won't exist.
Did you say gentleman?
Yeah, this is jackass.
Come on, give me a break.
Jackass. Sorry. He doesn't believe in it. It's just absurd to me that somebody with all of the science that is in front of us, that somebody can just say it doesn't exist anymore, and I will deregulate everything. So I was.
There are people who will say anything at any time to anybody to further their objectives, their personal egotistical objectives, and that's what we have dealing there. He knows damn well that he doesn't believe in what he's saying.
And I frankly don't believe that that humanity right now is threatened so much that it's too late. I think that we can turn it around if we all do it together, but it's going to take us all doing it together, and that's a long way off.
Which is what it took to bring Johnston back. It's what it took to bring New Orleans back. It's what it took for your gal Tara to survive in this new world that she brought herself to, and it's what we all face every day in our lives here in every neighborhood in New Orleans. Now, this play, Flood City, is being shown at Noka's NIMS Black Box Theater, so basically at Noka.
That is correct.
There's a lot of parking around Noka, people. I always want to make sure that people understand that you can get there and you can park, because this is a driving and parking city. It seems like we're a walking city, too, and we are in certain sections, but we're also an easy driving city. My husband just came back from New York and said, oh, my God, the traffic there is so ridiculous. And I left there and came here in part because of that traffic. So you can park at Noka. It's easy. And the play is playing from when to when?
This is our last weekend. We're Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday is our closing. So run out and get your tickets. We just had a great article in American Theater Magazine, so we're getting some national attention. It's some great work that the NOLA Project has consistently brought to us, and it's more of the same. So come on down. Come on down to Noka.
And the time for the show is?
8 p.m.
And how can people buy tickets in advance?
They can go to nolaproject.com.
nolaproject.com.
I believe
what
that's
is NOLA Project? I don't think I've heard of that.
The NOLA Project. That's the name of the theater company.
This is at nolaproject.com.
Yeah, you have to come and see the show.
I'd love to see it. I really would. And I can't do it tonight because I have to go to the opening of a coastal program on the river that the Tulane is opening, which I'm very excited about. And I'm going to miss the reading tonight. But you said Antenna. When are you doing your reading on Antenna?
Antenna, I think it's 6 tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Tomorrow's Thursday. I don't think I have any conflicts, so I might make it. So maybe I'll make it to yours Friday night. Y'all, this has been an interesting group of folks supporting the work and entrepreneurialism of the city on the one hand, and the creatives that we've been talking with. Brendan Jones, the author of The Alaskan Laundry, with a reading tonight at Octavia and Antenna tomorrow, and Flood City Director Mark Routhier with the production that's at Noka tonight through Saturday. Thank you guys very much. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you.
Thank you, too.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you all, and see you next week. We have a really terrific show lined up for next week, too, and look forward to talking with you and seeing you next week. Bye.